Something decides your whole day before you're even fully awake. The alarm goes off, your eyes crack open in the dark. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why discipline can feel like a fight inside your own brain and how to train that same brain to start wanting the effort instead. Before you've had one proper thought, your mind is already doing the calculation. The floor is cold, the day looks long, there's that thing you promised yourself you'd finally start. And somehow, before you feel fully involved in the decision, your hand is already moving toward the alarm. Silence. Tomorrow, for real this time. A minute later, you're asleep again. Then lunch comes around and the guilt starts. You open another tab, maybe another video about discipline, maybe you write out a new routine, one that looks slightly more convincing than the last one. For a few days it works, then it doesn't. And eventually, you're back at the same question. Why can I not just make myself do this? The usual answer is willpower. You need to be tougher, more motivated. Stop making excuses, push through it. But people who seem highly disciplined don't necessarily spend their lives winning more battles against themselves. A 2012 study led by psychologist Wilhelm Hoffman with Roy Baumeister and colleagues followed people through ordinary daily life. At random points, participants were asked what they wanted in that moment and whether they were actively resisting anything. You'd expect people with strong self control to report temptation all day long and simply be better at saying no. That wasn't really what showed up. People who scored higher in self control tended to report weaker desires, less conflict around those desires, and fewer situations where serious resistance was needed in the first place. That's a different picture of discipline. Maybe the goal isn't to become incredibly good at fighting yourself. Maybe it's to have fewer fights. That brings us to an idea psychologist Robert Eisenberger called learned industriousness. The name sounds academic. The basic idea isn't. Effort doesn't exist only as a decision. You can feel it. There's a particular sensation that comes with sitting down to something difficult. The heaviness before you start. The resistance. That small urge to do literally anything else for 5 minutes. And because effort has a felt component, our response to that feeling can be shaped through experience. If effort is repeatedly followed by something rewarding, the experience of effort itself can start to carry different meaning. It doesn't automatically become fun, but it can stop feeling like a signal that says, get out. It can begin to predict that something worthwhile is coming. Eisenberger's work also suggested that this learning can carry over. Training your relationship with effort in one area may affect how willing you are to exert effort elsewhere. So enjoying effort isn't simply something certain people were born with and everyone else missed out on. At least part of that relationship can be learned. A later idea makes this even more interesting. In 2018, Michael Inslicht and colleagues wrote about what they called the effort paradox. We obviously avoid effort sometimes. That's not controversial. Difficult things cost energy, attention, time. But we also choose difficulty for reasons that have nothing to do with convenience. People voluntarily run marathons. They take freezing showers. They learn instruments that sound terrible for the first 6 months. They play games specifically because they're difficult enough to beat them repeatedly. Sometimes the difficulty is part of what gives the thing value. So if you've always assumed your brain is simply built to hate effort, that's only part of the story. The question is what your brain has learned effort tends to lead to. And dopamine helps explain why that matters. Dopamine is often described as the brain's reward chemical. That's useful shorthand, but it leaves out something important. In classic experiments beginning in the 1990s, neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz and colleagues recorded dopamine activity, while animals learned that certain cues predicted rewards. At first, the strongest response came when the reward actually appeared. Then the animals learned the pattern. A cue happened first, the reward followed. Over time, much of that response shifted toward the cue itself. The brain wasn't just reacting to what was good, it was learning what predicted something good. You can probably recognize a version of this in everyday life. Think about your phone. You don't need to already be watching something interesting for reaching toward it to feel appealing. The device itself has become a predictor. Maybe there's a message, a new video, something funny, something new. You've repeated that sequence thousands of times. Now think about your desk or the document you've been avoiding. What does that predict? Not what you want it to predict. What has it actually predicted lately? Maybe being behind. Maybe staring at unfinished work. Maybe noticing how little you've done. Maybe sitting there already irritated with yourself. If that's the pattern your brain keeps seeing, pulling away makes sense. It's not that willpower has nothing to do with behavior. It's that willpower may be trying to clean up a problem that started earlier. Your brain already has an expectation about what happens when the work begins. And those expectations come from somewhere. For some people, part of this starts early. Think about what usually got praise when you were growing up: a high grade, a medal, the finished project, getting accepted somewhere, the visible result. People see outcomes easily. Effort is harder to see. Nobody watches the boring Wednesday night 3 weeks earlier when you sat there struggling through the work. So sometimes a strange association develops. Effort feels like the unpleasant part you have to survive before anything good happens. The reward is always later. The praise is later. The relief is later. The effort itself gets nothing. And there is another version of this that hits people who were known as the smart kid. Maybe school came easily at first. You didn't need to study much. That becomes part of the identity. You're the person who gets it quickly. Then eventually you encounter something you can't do quickly. Now, effort feels different. Needing to struggle can start to feel like evidence. Maybe I'm not actually as capable as people think. So instead of staying with the difficult task, you avoid the situation where that belief might be tested. That's not everyone's story, but it's common enough to matter. And by adulthood, some people have had years of experiences teaching them that effort means discomfort first and reward later. Then we sometimes make that association even stronger without realizing it. Think about a work session you forced yourself through. You didn't want to start, but you pushed. You stayed for 2 hours. You got to the end. What did you tell yourself? Probably not, good job showing up. More likely, that was awful. I barely got enough done. I'm still behind. Tomorrow has to be better than this. So, yes, you completed the work, but the whole experience ended in self criticism. Do that often enough, and tomorrow's resistance isn't mysterious. The task has history now. You approach it already knowing what it has felt like before. That's why simply forcing harder isn't always the answer. If every difficult session teaches you that effort ends in frustration and disappointment, more sessions like that aren't necessarily training the relationship you want. You can't talk yourself into enjoying a smell you hate. And you probably can't lecture yourself into suddenly enjoying effort either. Motivation helps sometimes, of course. But motivation moves around. Some mornings it's there, some mornings it isn't. A more useful target is the association itself. What does effort predict? If you want that prediction to change, there are 5 places I'd start. First, reward the act of showing up, not the outcome. Outcomes are bad training signals because they can take weeks, months, sometimes years. You can work properly and still not get the result you wanted. So, if your brain only receives any sense of success when the final outcome arrives, most days offer it nothing. Instead, mark the effort. You finish the session, tick it off, say done. Put something visible on the calendar. The exact method matters less than whether it actually feels positive to you. If ticking a box just feels like admin, it isn't much of a reward. The point is to give showing up some immediate value instead of postponing every good feeling until the result appears. At first, this can feel ridiculous. You may think, why am I congratulating myself for doing the bare minimum? Because right now you're not grading yourself. You're training what the act of doing the work means. Second, put something enjoyable near the beginning. Catherine Milkman and colleagues tested a version of this with gym attendants. Participants were given engaging audiobooks that they could access only while exercising at the gym. Initially, attendance increased substantially, roughly 51% in the strongest treatment group compared with the control condition. The interesting part is the association. The gym wasn't only the place where exercise happened anymore, it was also where the next chapter of something they genuinely wanted to hear became available. You can build smaller versions of that. A particular coffee you only make when you're about to write, a podcast you save for the walk to the gym, a playlist that only comes on when training starts. It has to stay connected to the activity, though. If you use the same reward all day anyway, there isn't much left for your brain to learn, and there's an important limitation here. The effect in Milkman's study weakened over time. So this isn't a magical lifelong trick. Think of it as a way to make the doorway easier while a new pattern is forming. Third, make the beginning embarrassingly small. A lot of resistance comes from the size of what your mind thinks you're about to do. Write the chapter feels large. Open the document doesn't. Work out for an hour has weight. Do the first set has much less. So shrink the commitment. 2 minutes, one paragraph, one set, and mean it when you say that's enough. If you secretly tell yourself just one sentence while knowing you're going to force another 90 minutes afterward, your brain learns that trick very quickly. Researchers at University College London followed people while they built new habits and found enormous variation in how long automaticity took. The average was around 2 months, but some people moved faster and others took much longer. One useful finding was that missing a single opportunity didn't appear to destroy the process. You don't need a perfect streak. You need enough repetition for the behavior to become familiar. Small helps because small is repeatable. Fourth, make your environment do some of the work. Go back to those people with high self control. One reason they may experience less temptation is that they aren't constantly placing themselves directly beside it and then hoping heroic willpower appears. That can be incredibly mundane. Log out of the account that eats an hour every night. Put the workout clothes somewhere you'll trip over them in the morning. Turn off the notifications instead of proving to yourself 50 times a day that you can ignore them. Move the phone, close the tab, prepare the room. These aren't dramatic acts of discipline. That's sort of the point. You're making fewer moments depend on discipline. And yes, the annoying part is that this requires planning while you feel fine. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, setting up tomorrow morning doesn't feel urgent. But tomorrow morning is exactly when you'll be glad you did it. The fifth one is easy to underestimate. Don't let every session end with you attacking yourself. Suppose you finally work for an hour, then spend the last 5 minutes thinking about everything you failed to finish. Tomorrow, you approach that work with yesterday still attached to it. So close the session deliberately, finish one small thing, write the final sentence, do one clean rep, put the file where you'll know exactly how to restart tomorrow. Then stop. You don't need to pretend the entire session was amazing. It probably wasn't. You're just refusing to make self disgust the closing ritual every single time you try. That changes the expectation you carry into the next attempt. None of this turns difficult things into easy ones. And a hard workout is still hard. Writing can still be frustrating, studying can still be boring. That's not the promise. The change is earlier than that. Starting stops feeling quite so abnormal. You don't need to love pain. You don't need to wake up excited about every difficult thing you've planned. What you're trying to build is familiarity. Effort stops feeling like an alarm your brain needs to escape from. It becomes a known place, something you've been through before, something that has started slowly to predict more than discomfort. And that's probably a more realistic version of craving discipline. Not craving the suffering, not becoming addicted to grinding, just reaching the point where approaching effort carries some anticipation instead of automatic dread. More than a century ago, William James wrote about habit and the nervous system in a way that still feels surprisingly modern. One of his ideas was that education should help make the nervous system an ally rather than an enemy. That's a useful way to think about discipline, too. You can spend every morning trying to overpower the automatic part of yourself, or you can train that automatic part until it stops pulling in the opposite direction quite so hard. That second version is less dramatic, but it's probably much closer to what lasting discipline actually looks like. So, out of the five, which one are you missing most? Rewarding the effort itself, putting something good at the start, making the entry smaller, changing the environment, or stopping the session before it turns into another round of self criticism? Pick one and tell me in the comments. And if you've spent years calling yourself lazy, it may be worth questioning that label. Sometimes what looks like a fixed personality is a pattern that's been repeated for a very long time. Patterns can change. Subscribe to The Mind Made Simple for more of the psychology behind who we are, explained simply.